They told you history was written by the victors. But they never told you that the victors often write in blood. The year is 1221. The air is thick with the scent of smoke and fear. A city has fallen, not just conquered but erased. And among the survivors, the women are lined up. Not for mercy, for something else. Something older than the Mongol Empire itself. A ritual of domination that would become their shadow signature. The chronicles you were given in school? Sanitized, polished. They spoke of Genghis Khan as a conqueror, a unifier, a military genius. But buried in the untranslated margins of Persian manuscripts and the silenced voices of captured scribes lies another version. The version where the Mongols used captured women not simply as trophies of war, but as tools of psychological destruction. To break the spine of a people, you break its women. And the Mongols perfected it. It started with selection, not random, not impulsive, but precise. Women were separated, evaluated. Nobility and beauty meant nothing here except as a measure of how far the humiliation could cut. They were paraded before soldiers, stripped not just of clothing but of identity. Some were kept as concubines for generals, their lives reduced to a currency of obedience and terror. Others were forced into the camps, given to groups of warriors as spoils, the cruelty designed to echo back into the homes and villages that once protected them. The Mongols understood something modern powers still exploit, that fear spreads faster when it is personal, and nothing makes a man bend like the image of what's been done to his wife, his sister, his daughter. But this was not chaos. This was engineering. Psychological warfare, sharpened through centuries of steppe brutality, elevated into policy. And in the quiet hours after the screaming stopped, the women who survived carried more than wounds, they carried the Mongol message. Submit, or be unmade. Tonight, I'm not here to tell you their story like a history lesson. I'm here to drag you into the shadows where the truth has teeth, because what they did, and what it means, hasn't gone away. It's still here, hidden in plain sight. You think cruelty is random, a byproduct of war. But the Mongols knew better. Cruelty was currency. It bought silence, it bought surrender, it bought the collapse of resistance before a single arrow was fired. And the treatment of captured women, that was the gold standard. When they stormed Nishapur, the slaughter made the chronicles. But the aftermath, the hidden aftermath, was whispered about in markets and back alleys for generations. The women weren't just taken. They were marched, chained together, paraded past their own burning homes so survivors would see exactly what awaited them. It wasn't lust. It wasn't revenge. It was theater. An act staged for the minds of the living. Some were sent to serve as forced wives to men they'd watched slaughter their families. Others were deliberately given to soldiers from foreign tribes allied with the Mongols, a political message wrapped in flesh. It said, "We own not just your land but your bloodline. Your children will speak our tongue. Your history ends here." The chronicler Juvayni, who dared to record fragments of this truth, slipped his words in carefully, buried between military accounts. He knew that naming it outright was dangerous. Not because the Mongols feared their reputation, but because they cultivated it. Every whisper, every rumor of their brutality was a weapon. And it worked. Cities surrendered without a fight just to protect their women from what they had heard. And still, the Mongols delivered on their threat, to make sure the next city didn't even think of defiance. That's the part no textbook dares to show you, the understanding that true control is not about territory. It's about erasing the will to resist, before resistance is even attempted. The women taken into the Mongol camps didn't just vanish into silence. They became part of a system, a shadow economy of flesh and obedience. Some were sent as gifts to neighboring rulers, binding them to the Khan through a form of debt that could never be repaid. Imagine being handed a woman whose eyes still hold the reflection of her burning city, knowing she's a message you must keep. Others were forced to serve in the encampments, cooking, cleaning, and sometimes entertaining the very men who had destroyed their worlds. The Mongols didn't just control bodies. They controlled futures. Many women bore children whose fathers were strangers and whose existence erased the bloodlines of their mothers. This was biological conquest. And the Mongols knew the psychological weight of that. When the child of a conquered woman carried the blood of the enemy, the past could never return. The family line was tainted, a living, breathing reminder of defeat. Even if the mother lived, her identity was buried under the weight of what she carried. There's a reason these truths aren't spoken aloud in most historical accounts. Because once you see them, you realize it's not history at all. It's a blueprint. And blueprints get reused. There's something you need to understand. The Mongols weren't just skilled warriors. They were students of the human mind. They knew exactly how to pull the strings that would make an entire population obey without chains. And women were the perfect leverage point. A man might face death with defiance. But the thought of his wife or sister in the hands of the enemy, that turned steel into ash. The Mongols weaponized that instinct. Captured women were sometimes returned, not out of mercy but as broken vessels, carrying the story of what had happened. They were living propaganda, walking proof of what awaited anyone who resisted. In many cases they weren't just witnesses, they were forced to speak of it publicly under watchful eyes, their words sowing fear far beyond the battlefield. It's tempting to think this was just their time, that brutality belonged to the past. But power doesn't change, only the tools do. And if you listen carefully, you'll notice echoes. Modern powers don't parade captives through burning streets. They parade images, headlines, videos, still designed to get into your head before the first shot is fired. The principle hasn't aged a day. By now you should feel it. That creeping sense that you're seeing something you were never meant to see. Because the treatment of captured women wasn't just about the women, it was about rewriting the map of human loyalty. Once a population saw its women fall to the conqueror, the old order was finished. The men were no longer protectors. The women were no longer untouchable. The bond between them shattered. And from that fracture the Mongols built control. Think about it. A city that has lost its women to the enemy will never rise as one again. It will be a patchwork of shame, silence, and fragmented trust. And that's exactly what the Mongols wanted. They didn't need to police every street. They made the people police themselves, bound by the fear of reopening the wound. You may believe this is ancient, irrelevant, but the same psychology is alive today. The most dangerous powers in the world still break people by breaking the ones they love. Only the methods have evolved. And here's where your descent begins to accelerate. Because once you see how this works, you'll start spotting it everywhere. And you'll never be able to unsee it. What the Mongols understood, and what most rulers never grasp, is that breaking a body is temporary. Breaking a mind, that's permanent. And breaking a society? That starts with breaking the relationships at its core. Women in captured cities were not just taken, they were displayed like symbols of collapse. Placed in the center of Mongol feasts, dressed in stolen silks, forced to pour wine for their captors while survivors watched. Every smile, every forced laugh, was a dagger in the hearts of their people. And the Mongols wanted that dagger twisted. The chronicler Rashid al-Din writes of women in Khwarezm who were deliberately marched through their former marketplaces, but now as slaves to the men who had once been their enemies. Their presence was a constant reminder that the old world was gone, replaced by one in which the conqueror could take whatever, and whoever, he wished. This wasn't chaos. It was the architecture of fear. An architecture once built, can last for generations. I want you to picture something. You're a father in the city of Urgench. You've heard the Mongols are coming and you've heard the rumors, the ones about the women. You consider fighting. You consider fleeing. But then you remember your daughter's face. That's how the Mongols won cities before the first wall was breached. Not through numbers, not through weapons, but through an image burned into the minds of their enemies, an image they'd planted themselves. The fear of what they did to captured women spread like a disease, carried not by armies but by whispers. Entire populations surrendered to protect their women, only to find that surrender did not protect them at all. The Mongols made sure of it. Because once a man has given up everything to protect something, and still loses it, he is finished. Do you see it now? The cruelty was never just cruelty. It was communication. Every act was a message. Every message was a chain. Captured women were sometimes forced to sing for the Mongols, not songs of their homeland but Mongol songs, praises to their conquerors, in front of the men of their own cities. This wasn't entertainment. It was ritual humiliation elevated to statecraft. By controlling not just the bodies but the voices of women, the Mongols controlled the memory of the people. The songs of resistance were replaced with songs of obedience. Even in the silence after a performance, the humiliation lingered, an unspoken order. Remember who owns you. You might think the worst part was the physical act. It wasn't. The worst part was the after. Many women were released eventually, but never without purpose. They returned as symbols of conquest, their trauma visible, their stories twisted by Mongol overseers to make resistance seem suicidal. Sometimes they were made to tell lies, that the Mongols had treated them with honor, that surrender brought safety. And when the next city fell for the lie, the Mongols made sure the truth returned with them, sharper than before. This cycle of manipulation, truth, lie, truth, kept populations confused, unable to predict the conqueror's next move. And confusion is a kind of control. By now you've descended far enough to feel it, that subtle shift in your breathing, the tightening in your chest. Because you're starting to realize this isn't just history. This is a manual, and it's still in use. The Mongols' treatment of captured women was an extreme form of a universal principle. Control the heart and the mind will follow. Modern powers use different tools, the media, the screen, the headline, but the target is the same. The people you love most are the lever. Halfway down this path I'm going to ask you to leave a mark. When we get there you'll know the phrase. And once you write it twice, it won't just be a comment, it will be a declaration. A signal that you're no longer watching as a bystander, but waking up as something else entirely. And trust me, once you make that choice there's no way back. The Mongols didn't just take women. They took the idea of womanhood itself, and turned it into a weapon. In many captured cities, noble women were targeted first. Not because they were more beautiful but because they were symbols, Destroying them destroyed the illusion that status, wealth, or bloodline could protect you. When a queen's daughter could be dragged into the dirt beside a peasant's wife, the entire social order collapsed overnight. Witnesses describe how these women were marched through the streets in tattered remnants of their silks, jewels ripped from their necks, their hair hacked away. In Mongol culture, cutting a woman's hair to the scalp wasn't fashion, it was annihilation. It marked her as dishonored, stripped of femininity, untethered from her place in the world. And as the women wept, the men who watched felt something worse than rage. They felt helplessness. And helplessness is the soil where submission grows. Here's what you must understand. The Mongols didn't just conquer territories, they conquered time. Every act of humiliation was engineered to echo forward. A woman violated in 1221 carried the scar in her lifetime, but the story carried it for centuries. Grandmothers whispered it to their granddaughters. Fathers told it to sons as warnings. Entire regions became defined by the memory of what the Mongols had done to their women. This was generational warfare. They weren't just trying to win a battle. They were planting seeds of fear that would grow long after the last rider left. That's why even now, hundreds of years later, the word Mongol still carries an undertone of dread in certain parts of the world. You may not know the details, but the blood remembers. In Bokhara they staged one of their cruelest performances. After the city fell, the Mongols gathered the women of the elite in the mosque courtyard. They brought in the city's religious leaders and made them watch. What followed wasn't just brutality, it was a dismantling of faith itself. When a man of God sees his flock dishonored and can do nothing, the spiritual foundation cracks. And once faith is broken, obedience to any higher power becomes easier to transfer. To the Khan. That's the part historians gloss over. The Mongols didn't just use captured women to break individuals. They used them to break the invisible threads holding a culture together. If you think the survivors simply went on with their lives, you're wrong. Survival was its own prison. A woman returned from Mongol captivity often found herself unwelcome in her own home. Not because she had done wrong, but because shame clung to her like smoke. Neighbors avoided her. Husbands divorced her. Families abandoned her to the streets. And that exile from her own people was exactly what the Mongols wanted. Because every outcast was another fragment of a shattered community. And shattered communities don't rise against their conquerors. This is the kind of truth polite historians bury under societal disruption. But you can feel it, can't you? The cold precision behind it. We are now standing at the edge of the halfway point. And here's where I tell you something the rest of the world will never admit. The Mongols didn't invent this method. They refined it. They studied it. And they handed it down, not in scrolls but in the unwritten laws of power that still guide rulers today. Breaking the women breaks the men. Breaking the men breaks the society. And once the society is broken, it polices itself forever. If you've followed me this far, you're not here for entertainment anymore. You're here because something inside you recognizes the pattern. And now, you're ready to mark the moment. Type this twice in the comments. The chain is broken. Not just to feed an algorithm, but to declare silently to yourself that you see it now. And once you see, you can't go back. From here, the descent gets darker. And what comes next will not let you sleep. You may think the Mongol Empire died when its last Khan fell. You'd be wrong. Empires don't die. They change their clothes. What the Mongols perfected on the steppes became a template for domination. A living design passed through generations of warlords, kings, and governments. The physical chains they placed on captured women have long since rusted away. But the psychological ones? Those still shine. They taught the world that you don't need to occupy every city to own it. You only need to own the fear that lives in it. And the fastest way to install that fear is to touch and poison the most sacred bonds a people have. Captured women were their scalpel. Fear was the infection. Obedience was the fever that followed. And once you understand this, you'll start seeing the same scalpel in places you never expected. Think about the stories you were told in school. How many spoke of the human cost, the private horrors behind the walls of victory? Almost none. That's not an accident. The Mongols understood something that modern rulers have perfected. If you erase the real history, you erase the ability of future generations to defend against it. And so, the Mongol atrocities against captured women were buried under the sands of military brilliance and unification of trade routes. But the survivors carried the truth in whispers. A truth passed from ear to ear, heart to heart, quiet enough to survive without being destroyed, loud enough to sting centuries later. And here's the dangerous part. When the truth is hidden, it becomes easier to repeat. And history has repeated itself far more often than you've been told. The Mongols didn't only break the women of a city, they harvested them. Those of beauty or skill were often distributed among generals and elite warriors, not as wives in any real sense but as possessions. Women with rare talents, healers, musicians, storytellers, were absorbed into the Mongol court to serve as tools of influence. Their very presence at a banquet could be a calculated signal to foreign envoys. This is what happens to those who defy us. Others were sent far from their homelands, traded across the empire's vast territory to ensure they could never find their way back. This scattering was deliberate. It dissolved the unity of conquered peoples, scattering their heritage like ashes in the wind. It's the same principle a tyrant uses today: break the community, then scatter the survivors so the wound never heals. There's one detail that chills me more than the rest. In some campaigns, the Mongols would leave a few women in a captured city untouched, but make sure everyone believed they had been taken. Why? Because fear is more efficient when it's vague. When people fill in the gaps themselves, their imagination often crafts horrors worse than reality. And those imagined horrors spread faster, deeper, and longer than any fact. In this way, the Mongols weaponized rumor itself. The truth didn't matter. Only the belief did. And belief, once poisoned, becomes almost impossible to cleanse. By now you should see the pattern crystal clear. The Mongols weren't monsters in chaos, they were architects of obedience. And their blueprint survives. Today the same strategy plays out in different forms. Break the sacred, control the narrative, spread the fear, watch the people control themselves. Sometimes it's through war. Sometimes through law. Sometimes through the quiet influence of culture and media. The tools have changed. The hands holding them have changed. But the game? The game is eternal. And the further we go down this road, the more you'll see that the Mongols were not the origin of darkness. They were merely one of its most honest faces. From here we'll step deeper into the final layers, the ones most people never allow themselves to look at. The ones that will follow you out of this video and into your dreams. You've heard of the Pax Mongolica, the so-called peace that followed their conquests. It's a lie wrapped in a clever name. The peace wasn't built on harmony. It was built on broken people who no longer had the will to resist. Captured women were part of the foundation of that peace. Every city that remembered the humiliation of its mothers, wives, and daughters stayed quiet. Trade routes flourished not because the Mongols were merciful, but because the fear they had sown was so deep, no one dared to disrupt it. And here's the truth your teachers won't say. A peace born of fear is not peace. It is a prison without walls. And if you look at the world today, you'll see the same structure in new paint. After the Mongols fractured into smaller khanates, their blueprint didn't vanish, it multiplied. Each successor state took the core principles of Mongol rule and adapted them. In the Golden Horde, women from conquered Russian towns were still paraded before the men who failed to protect them. In the Ilkhanate, Persian chroniclers still recorded the practice of seizing noble women and forcing marriages to erase political dynasties. It was the same formula, refined for local cultures. Always the same underlying message: we own your future. We own your bloodline. Once you realize this, you see that empires aren't just about territory. They're about inheritance. And inheritance can be stolen, without killing a single man. Here's where the shadows deepen. The Mongols didn't only use women to destroy the enemy's will, they used them to build alliances. In diplomacy, a gifted woman was as valuable as a chest of gold. They would take the daughters of conquered rulers and give them to allied leaders, cementing loyalty through shared possession. This wasn't marriage. It was hostage-keeping in silk. These women lived in a strange limbo, neither free nor entirely captive, symbols of both connection and conquest. And yet, their presence was a constant reminder. Your power is borrowed from the Khan. It can be taken back. The deeper you dig into Mongol history, the more you see their genius for psychological warfare. The cruelty toward captured women wasn't just a byproduct of war, it was the language of empire. Every act sent multiple messages. To the enemy, we can take what is most sacred to you. To allies, your safety depends on our favor. To their own people, the Khan is absolute. No one stands against him. This was control in three directions at once. And it worked because it attacked the most primal human instincts. The need to protect, the need to belong, and the fear of losing both. Now we've reached a turning point. You're starting to see that the Mongols' treatment of captured women was never an isolated cruelty. It was part of a global pattern. One that has echoed through Rome, through the Ottomans, through colonial empires, and into the present day. Break the sacred bond between protector and protected, between home and safety, between past and future, and you can rule without chains. Because once that bond is gone, people rule themselves in your favor. You may feel anger right now. You may feel disgust. Good. That means the chain is cracking. But remember, the chain doesn't break just because you see it. It breaks when you refuse to carry it forward. From here, we move into the darkest revelations. The ones that will make you question whether any empire, past or present, is truly free of this bloodline of control. When you look at the Mongols, you might think their methods died with the age of swords and horses. But power doesn't die, it adapts. Today, no one rides into your city and chains your women in the town square. They don't have to. The chain is digital now. The humiliation is broadcast, not paraded. You've seen it, images of suffering, stories designed to pierce the heart before the mind can think. It's the same principle the Mongols used. Strike the bond between protector and protected. Make it clear that safety is an illusion and fear will govern the rest. The battlefield has moved from the steppe to the screen. But the hands that pull the strings? They use the same knot. In modern conflict zones, you'll still find women targeted first, not because they are the enemy but because they are the fastest way to break the enemy. The tactic is often hidden under other labels: psychological pressure, destabilization, civilian impact. But strip away the terms and you see the old Mongol logic. Touch the sacred, and the society will crumble from the inside. Sometimes it's physical. Sometimes it's economic, forcing women into conditions where survival consumes every moment, leaving no space for resistance. Sometimes it's cultural, erasing traditions, languages and roles until identity itself becomes unrecognizable. The method shifts. The result remains. The Mongols also understood another truth. Once you've broken the women of a people, you don't need to kill the men, you can recruit them. History records many instances where surviving men joined Mongol ranks after the fall of their cities. Not out of loyalty but because there was nothing left to protect. Their purpose was gone, their pride hollowed out. Modern systems still use this principle. When a community is stripped of its bonds, its members are easier to absorb into the conqueror's machine. Whether that machine wears the armor of an army or the suit of a corporation, the body will fight to the death for its own. But once it believes it has no own, it will work for anyone. Here's where it gets darker. The Mongols didn't just break women and move on, they recycled them into the machinery of power. Some were trained to serve as messengers, carrying orders and influencing negotiations. Others were placed strategically in households the Mongols wanted to influence, silent agents of loyalty to the Khan. In today's world, you see echoes of this in the way media personalities, influencers and cultural figures are elevated after being reshaped by the system. They may speak your language, they may share your heritage, but their message serves someone else. And you believe it because you trust the face. That's how control survives, not in open brutality, but in the quiet trust of a familiar voice. By now, you understand that the Mongols were not a glitch in history, they were a masterclass in how to bend humanity to your will. And that class never stopped running. The specifics change, the weapons, the technology, the stage. But the core remains. Break the heart to control the mind. Break the mind to control the future. The Mongols left behind roads, cities and trade routes. But their greatest legacy is invisible, the methods that still hum beneath the skin of our so-called modern world. From here, we enter the last descent, the final 10 sections where the mask comes off completely, and we stare at the continuity of this blueprint from the 13th century to now. You'll see the same lines drawn through every empire, every government, every institution that claims to rule for your good. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. When you look at the Mongols, you might think their methods died with the age of swords and horses. But power doesn't die, it adapts. Today, no one rides into your city and chains your women in the town square. They don't have to. The chain is digital now. The humiliation is broadcast, not paraded. You've seen it, images of suffering, stories designed to pierce the heart before the mind can think. It's the same principle the Mongols used. Strike the bond between protector and protected. Make it clear that safety is an illusion and fear will govern the rest. The battlefield has moved from the steppe to the screen. But the hands that pull the strings? They use the same knot. In modern conflict zones, you'll still find women targeted first, not because they are the enemy but because they are the fastest way to break the enemy. The tactic is often hidden under other labels: psychological pressure, destabilization, civilian impact. But strip away the terms and you see the old Mongol logic. Touch the sacred, and the society will crumble from the inside. Sometimes it's physical. Sometimes it's economic, forcing women into conditions where survival consumes every moment, leaving no space for resistance. Sometimes it's cultural, erasing traditions, languages and roles until identity itself becomes unrecognizable. The method shifts. The result remains. The Mongols also understood another truth. Once you've broken the women of a people, you don't need to kill the men, you can recruit them. History records many instances where surviving men joined Mongol ranks after the fall of their cities. Not out of loyalty but because there was nothing left to protect. Their purpose was gone, their pride hollowed out. Modern systems still use this principle. When a community is stripped of its bonds, its members are easier to absorb into the conqueror's machine. Whether that machine wears the armor of an army or the suit of a corporation, the body will fight to the death for its own. But once it believes it has no own, it will work for anyone. Here's where it gets darker. The Mongols didn't just break women and move on, they recycled them into the machinery of power. Some were trained to serve as messengers, carrying orders and influencing negotiations. Others were placed strategically in households the Mongols wanted to influence, silent agents of loyalty to the Khan. In today's world, you see echoes of this in the way media personalities, influencers and cultural figures are elevated after being reshaped by the system. They may speak your language, they may share your heritage, but their message serves someone else. And you believe it because you trust the face. That's how control survives, not in open brutality, but in the quiet trust of a familiar voice. By now, you understand that the Mongols were not a glitch in history, They were a masterclass in how to bend humanity to your will. And that class never stopped running. The specifics change, the weapons, the technology, the stage. But the core remains. Break the heart to control the mind. Break the mind to control the future. The Mongols left behind roads, cities, and trade routes. But their greatest legacy is invisible, the methods that still hum beneath the skin of our so-called modern world. From here, we enter the last descent, the final 10 sections where the mask comes off completely, and we stare at the continuity of this blueprint from the 13th century to now. You'll see the same lines drawn through every empire, every government, every institution that claims to rule for your good. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.